Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Tuesday the 20th of August in London. I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Biden passes the torch to Harris. The US president calls for democracy to be preserved as the Democratic National Convention kicks off in Chicago. Antony Blinken says Hamas must say yes to a Gaza ceasefire proposal that's been accepted by Israel. Plus, the British tech tycoon Mike Lynch and 5 others remain unaccounted for after a luxury yacht sinks off the coast of Sicily. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. US President Joe Biden has delivered an emotional and bittersweet call for Democrats to rally behind Kamala Harris on the first night of the party's national convention in Chicago. The president's remarks, which began at 11:30 p.m. on the East Coast and stretched late into the night, focused on cementing his legacy while also handing over to a new generation.
Selecting Kamala was the very first decision I made when I became our nominee. And it was the best decision I made my whole career. And she'll be a president our children can look up to.
Biden also cast his decision to exit the race following a calamitous debate performance as the natural conclusion of a 5-decade political career.
It's been the honor of my lifetime to serve as your president. I love the job, but I love my country more.
The president was at times overwhelmed, dabbing tears from his eyes after an introduction by his daughter, pledging to close out the last 5 months of his presidency with accomplishments. Joe Biden's speech came after his Vice President Kamala Harris made a surprise appearance on the first night of the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. The party's newly minted nominee for the White House used a brief moment on stage to thank the president for his service to the nation.
Joe, thank you for your historic leadership, for your lifetime of service to our nation, and for all you will continue to do. We are forever grateful to you.
Harris secured the party's nomination uncontested after Biden threw his support behind his vice president as he withdrew his bid for re-election. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton, the only woman aside from Kamala Harris to lead a major party presidential ticket, called on Democrats to help the vice president break through the glass ceiling and ascend to the presidency.
I see the freedom to look our children in the eye and say, in America, you can go as far as your hard work and talent will take you, and mean it. And you know what? On the other side of that glass ceiling is Kamala Harris raising her hand and taking the oath of office as our 47th President of the United States.
Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump in 2016 after leading in the polls for much of the race. Current nationwide polling averages give Harris a slim lead over Trump, although still within the margin of error. In other news, US intelligence agencies say they're confident Iran is behind a recent hack of Donald Trump's presidential campaign. Investigators believe that attackers gained access to internal documents relating to the former president, but it's unclear whether attacks on the Democratic campaign succeeded. In a joint statement, the agencies say Tehran sees American elections as consequential for its national security interests. News of the breach emerged after Microsoft flagged Iranian government attempts to access the emails of campaign staff members. In the Middle East, Antony Blinken says Israel has accepted a ceasefire proposal to halt the war in Gaza. According to the US Secretary of State, now Hamas must say yes.
The fierce urgency of now, that's what I think we're all feeling. And we do see this as the best opportunity to finally get this over the finish line. We'll never give up on it, but the challenge is the longer this goes on, the more hostages will suffer and possibly perish, and the more other things happen that could make things impossible.
Antony Blinken speaking there during his 9th trip to the Middle East since the conflict broke out. The top US diplomat said he will next travel on to Egypt and Qatar to understand what their leaders are hearing from Hamas on the next steps. Meanwhile, both Iran and Hezbollah have vowed to retaliate against Israel for recent assassinations it says they committed. Blinken's trip was seen in part as an effort to deter such a strike. The British entrepreneur Mike Lynch is among 6 people missing after his luxury yacht was struck by a tornado and sunk off the coast of Sicily. One person has died, according to the Italian Coast Guard, which is leading search operations. Oceanographer Simon Boxall knows the area well.
You can get some quite horrendous storms. In fact, some of the worst storms I've been in have been in that region. And they do sort of build up very, very quickly. The sea temperatures in the area are 4 degrees higher than sort of the 20-year average. They really are very, very warm. And that fuels these storms.
Simon Boxall from the University of Southampton speaking there. Lynch was found not guilty by a San Francisco jury just 10 weeks ago over accusations that he had committed Silicon Valley's biggest ever fraud during the $11 billion sale of his company Antony to Hewlett-Packard in 2011. A European Central Bank policymaker says the case for a September rate cut is growing stronger because of increasing risks to the growth outlook. In a speech in New York, Olli Rehn pointed to no clear signs of a pickup in the manufacturing sector as boosting the case for monetary easing. It's the first comment from a Governing Council member during the ECB's summer break. Markets have priced in a quarter-point cut from the ECB at its next meeting on the 12th of September. And the UK government has signed off on London's City Airport's plan to grow passenger numbers by nearly a third. The move is designed to show the government's pro-growth credentials, but it's angered environmental campaigners who say it will increase carbon emissions. Bloomberg's James Woolcock has more.
London's smallest airport has been pushing to fly more for over 2 years. It had been blocked by its local council over fears about the noise. A decision the Labour government have now overruled. Greenpeace say the approval undermines the UK's climate leadership. The argument over London City is a smaller version of the much bigger debate over how Britain balances its environmental commitments with its growth targets. In London, James Woolcock, Bloomberg Radio.
Those are your top stories this morning. Now, in a moment, we'll dig into Joe Biden's speech to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago and bring you more on that story around the British entrepreneur Mike Lynch. But another story that we've been watching about the DNC in Chicago has been the social media influencers who Democrats have invited to be part of the media circus at the event as well. Some 200 of them have been given privileges like access to delegates and studio space on site in Chicago, a reflection of the campaign's belief that social media creators are at least as important as traditional media organisations for getting its message out to voters. So some of those will also, of course, be making speeches at the DNC. We saw Deja Fox speaking earlier on Monday evening in Chicago. Of course, an influencer that's focused on reproductive rights, which is seen as a key issue for Kamala Harris to lead on in the campaign as well. She actually worked on Harris's failed bid for the nomination in 2020, and she's now based in Arizona, which is one of the key swing states to watch in this campaign as well. But getting social media influencers involved has also highlighted how sensitive the issue over the war in Gaza is for the Democratic Party, and you can read more on that story from our colleague Pratish Narayanan on Bloomberg.com and of course on the terminal. Let's dig into the comments though that we heard from the President, Joe Biden, to the convention. Our Bloomberg TV anchor Kriti Gupta was listening in and she's with us now this morning. Kriti, great to have you. Joe Biden needed to show that he was handing over the torch to Kamala Harris from a position of strength. Did he succeed?
He did succeed, but he made a very quick appearance and then he's now off to his vacation, his family vacation. So it really shows that he's not dwelling on the issue. He's trying to kind of show his support, show that he is very much on board of a Kamala presidency, but then ready to move forward and ready to kind of focus on being president for the remainder of his term.
What stood out for you from his speech?
Well, I think what was really interesting is that he, of course, endorsed her in a very big way. We already knew that he had done that. But I think the fact that he was greeted with a lot of, "We love you, Joe Biden. We like the crowd."
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, the crowd was chanting. But remember the background of this. He didn't want to step down. He didn't want to be in this position. He actually, behind the scenes, reports have suggested that he thinks he still could have won the election, but that it would have done irreparable damage to his party. So imagine still making that DNC appearance with the thought process and with the idea that people are chanting for and appreciating and cheering him on for the very fact that he stepped down, the very thing he did want to do. So the fact that he was still able to deliver a speech, given the issues that he's had in the past with some of his kind of endurance issues, and still be able to do that in the face of that, I thought that was pretty admirable, frankly.
It was a marquee event. Of course, the party, Kamala Harris, did make a quick appearance on stage earlier on in the evening. We heard from Hillary Clinton as well. On that issue, though, of the war in Gaza as being something that potentially Kamala Harris is vulnerable about, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who spoke earlier in the evening as well, got one of the biggest applause lines of the night by saying that Harris was working to bring a ceasefire in Gaza. Is this a difficult issue for the Vice President?
This is a very difficult issue, and this is where she has actually been able to garner more support than President Biden has. Remember, this is the Achilles heel for the Democratic Party right now, and for, I think, Americans broadly. This has become a very divisive issue, as we've seen across college campuses, among many, many other different forums. And one of the issues with President Biden, and we were expected to see it with the nominee Kamala Harris as well, was what was going on in Dearborn, Michigan. It's kind of a microcosm of what's going on in the broader country, which is that they're losing out on not only the Muslim vote, but then a lot of people who support, or at least don't, I should say, push back against some of the atrocities that are happening in Gaza as well. And the American administration being seen as supporting that. So that was going to be the Achilles heel. But the fact that Kamala Harris has actually made an active approach to say, we're listening to the people who are on both sides of this, we're willing to take meetings on both sides of this, there's still a step further than Joe Biden has gone when it comes to appeasing that part of the dialogue. And I think that's where she started to see more support, more of the independent voters who've looked at both candidates and say, actually, this might be a turning point for her. It's interesting, though, that comment came out from AOC. So Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, for our international audience, she is an up-and-comer in the Democratic Party. She's a congresswoman from New York and also represents, of course, the Latino vote, the minority vote, and is aligned in a lot of issues with a lot of the Muslim vote as well.
Yeah, certainly very interesting to hear her comments at the event. Of course, Donald Trump doing his best to garner some of the attention, while very much political eye has been focused on Chicago, focusing on divisions between Harris and Biden. Is that getting any traction? It's
not getting that much traction. In fact, when you look at some of the pollsters, some of the kind of political strategists, the concern here for President Trump is that he actually hasn't been able to regain the momentum. There was always going to be that kind of knee-jerk reaction that you saw when Kamala Harris was going to be named the nominee, coming out kind of with a bang. But this was kind of being viewed initially, at least in the polling numbers, as a little bit of a honeymoon phase. And then we were expected to kind of see some of those polling numbers come back to President Trump in the lead. We haven't seen that yet. Now, we're still waiting till September, when there is, remember, it's still a summer period. People are still on holiday. Not everyone is as engaged in politics right now in the States. It's driving season, nevertheless. But in September, if you continue to see those polling numbers show the same lack of momentum, this is where you get into trouble. I think that's the concern around some of the campaign strategy in the Trump campaign right now.
Kriti Gupta, Bloomberg TV anchor, thank you very much. Well, let's turn to a different story that we're following now. The British entrepreneur Mike Lynch, among the 6 people missing after a luxury yacht was struck by a tornado and sunk off the coast of Sicily. Our reporter Tiwa Adebayo is here with more on this story. Tiwa, what do we know about what happened?
So, as you mentioned, it was early Monday morning when that luxury yacht sank off the coast of Sicily. On board were 12 guests and 10 crew members, among which were the British tech entrepreneur Mike Lynch. Now, currently he's still missing. We have heard from some sources that his wife, Angela, was amongst those rescued. Just to give you a bit more context about who he really is, he's an eminent figure in British business. He's known by some as the British Bill Gates. He's the founder of multiple technology companies, including Darktrace, which he founded through his venture capital firm. That's a cybersecurity business. It has a market cap of over $4 billion and is listed on the London Stock Exchange. And outside of that, he's also been an advisor to 2 former UK prime ministers. So a very important figure in the world of technology and in the world of the wider UK landscape.
What do we know about the other people who were on board this yacht?
Well, at the moment, Italy's Coast Guard are leading the search and rescue operation. They've recovered 15 people. Unfortunately, 1 person has died. That leaves 6 missing, including Lynch. And just in the last few moments, we've heard from the BBC that among those missing are a Morgan Stanley banker and a Clifford Chance lawyer, as well as Mike Lynch's 18-year-old daughter, Hannah, who's also been reported unaccounted for. In terms of what's being put on in terms of the rescue effort, there's a team of specialised divers that have been employed to look for any individuals that might still be inside the boat. That's now 50 metres underwater. There's also a helicopter that's been drafted in, as well as the fire brigade, who have joined the search. In terms of what's happened over the course of those few hours since the sinking on Monday, there's been some quite astonishing stories coming out of this rescue mission, including the story of one British mother who has now been rescued. We know that she is a colleague of Mike Lynch. She says she kept her baby alive after the boat sank by holding the 1-year-old child above the water until the two were able to get into a rescue boat. She says her family only survived because they were on the deck of the boat at the time that it sank too.
Yes, so still, of course, that search and rescue mission underway. Tiwa, I wonder if also you could just brief us a little bit on what we know about the trip itself. Mike Lynch had been in the news recently because he was cleared just weeks ago on fraud charges.
Yes, this is perhaps one of the most surprising parts of the story. So back in 2011, Lynch made his riches really by selling his company to the US computing giant Hewlett-Packard for $11 billion. But he had been embroiled in a decade-long legal battle about the acquisition. He was accused of committing Silicon Valley's biggest ever fraud during the sale, but he was found not guilty in San Francisco just 10 weeks ago, and they were supposed to be celebrating.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.